first time on my YouTube channel, I am going to be having an interview. So this is pretty exciting. I've interviewed Deane Proctor, Reverend Deane Proctor, soon to be Dr. Deane Proctor, before my podcast, and I'll link to that interview. We talked about mental health in the church. Deane and I have known each other for quite a while, and a number of months back, we had a conversation about something that happened with him, a sabbatical he took, and I thought, that's really interesting. I really wish that I had had the opportunity to do something like that. When we think of pastor sabbaticals, maybe we think of pastors just sleeping in all the time and just getting that rest. But Deane really took advantage of some time that he had. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Deane, before we get into that, could you just share a little bit about who you are and what you're interested in?
Yeah, so I'm in Brantford, Ontario, Canada, and been been pastoring in one way, shape, or form for 20 years now, actually, which is really feels weird to say that. I'm not serving in a church currently. Recently wrapped up a role at Queensway Baptist here in Brantford, which was an excellent place to spend the last decade. And we'll talk a little bit more about just how excellent it was in terms of their generosity and the way that they blessed me over and over again. So right now, on lockdown, like the rest of the world, and just sort of cocooning at home and listening to my 45s a lot. That's me.
For younger people, you might have to define what a 45 is. They're going to be thinking, why does he have these pistols around that he's shooting off?
Right. 45 RPM records.
Okay,
Yes.
That's good. The things that we take for granted. The other day, I mentioned something about being in the boonies, and my kids looked at me like, "What are you talking about? What language are you speaking?" And actually, I didn't realize that boonies is short for boondock, which actually comes from the Filipino language, Tagalog. So it actually is another language. But anyways, they had never heard that phrase before. So it's good for us to define these things. You were mentioning about Queensway, and I would like to affirm Queensway, the church that ordained me quite a few years ago. And I had the opportunity to attend Queensway during a break in ministry while you were a pastor, and that was a lot of fun to sit under your teaching. So we were talking a little bit about sabbatical, and first of all, why don't you explain what a sabbatical is? Because maybe some people are not familiar. I guess a sabbatical can take many forms, can it?
Absolutely. I'll kind of describe what mine was, and hopefully in doing that, it'll give a bit of a definition for it. Sabbatical is not, more vacation. It's not additional holidays. It's not about just doing nothing. Sabbatical, biblically, is about resting and preparing and being renewed for the next season. So you even read, God so values dirt that in scripture, he says, give it once every 7 years, give it a rest. And God so values dirt, I think he values us more. And so we in the church are just getting our heads around this, at least in our tradition, in the Baptist tradition. I think some other denominations may be farther down the road on this one. But that's what sabbatical was. And usually it's a time of renewal that includes a specific focus or a specific study on a specific topic that is meant to contribute to that renewal and that preparation for the next season.
Mm-hmm. And the church was open to giving you that time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt I had been there. Let me see. At that point, I had been there 9 years, and so it was beyond the biblical 7-year mark. But I'd been there 9 years, and I just felt like I was feeling a little gassed, and I just needed that time to be restored and renewed. And I wanted to continue on stronger and continue to be the lead pastor there. So I went to the council, which is our elders, if you will, and in the fall of 2017, started to talk to them about a sabbatical for the fall of 2018. And then, unlike what I just described with leaving the earth fallow for a year, it was not a year sabbatical that I asked for or even was granted. It was a 3-month from September. From October, November, and December of 2018. And so, but we planned ahead for it and started talking about it and laying the groundwork for it a full 12 months before I actually was off. And that was wise. And I guess one thing that I also want to affirm my elders in, and this is also strange for our Baptist tradition, they didn't put it to a congregational vote. They simply came to the congregation at the annual meeting in January of 2018 and said, this is happening, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And so it's going to happen 9 months from now. So just be prepared, but it is happening. So for me, that was a really great affirmation that they were supportive and encouraging and understood that this was an investment and that they were going to anticipate a return on that investment.
Mm-hmm. And I'm supposing that you wouldn't suggest a pastor who'd been at their church for a year to be asking for a sabbatical.
That's a tough ask. You know, you've really got to have earned a lot of relational currency to make that kind of an ask. Yeah,
I think so. So, and what was the goal? What were you trying to accomplish in your sabbatical, aside from rest, because that is a part of it? Because there's things that you're going to be doing, but it's not going to be the same level of activity that you would do as you're pastoring a church. So there's some rest that is taking place, but what else were you hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, and that's a really important point, that there was a plan, a sabbatical plan, that not a, you know, at 9:05 every morning I'll do this, and at 10:30 I'll do, not that kind of a plan, but something that I would then, when I came back, be able to speak to and say to my elders, and here's how I worked on this area, and here's what I found out when I was exploring or researching this area. So there was a plan. And for me, it was a plan about integration. I felt like our church at the time was, like many, I think, really great at welcoming people once those people walked in the door, but were really bad at engaging people where they were outside of the church building. And so, but even then I saw us falling down. And so I wanted I wanted to explore a more intentional way of integrating someone into the fellowship at their comfort and at their speed, but so that no one fell between the cracks, no one didn't get spoken to. We've all had that experience of sadly, of, you know, visiting a congregation, and you and I would go to visit a congregation, and our antenna is up in a little bit different way because of the role that we have. But we've all, I think, gone there sadly to visit someone and been ignored. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, almost you feel like you're being tolerated. I've never actually been asked to move seats from where I was sitting, but I've heard those horror stories too.
Heard them too.
Yeah. So for me, the study was about integration. How are churches integrating first-time visitors all the way along, walking with them at the visitor's pace to the point where they can become fully invested participants in the mission of the local congregation. Okay. So we visited, it ended up being 13 Sundays that I was off in that 3-month period. And so we visited 14 churches in 4 or 5 different denominations in that time, in 3 different provinces and 1 U.S. state. And that just gave us gave me, of course my wife was with me, gave us a broad look at who's doing what and who's doing it well and who's doing it badly and who's doing it in ways that I can't relate to. Like I visited North Point Church in Atlanta, Georgia, mm-hmm. which has, I think at last count, like a skrillion worshipers every weekend, I think. And so the scale that they do things on was not the scale that I was looking to do things on. So a lot of it wasn't transferable. But much of what we saw was transferable. and I tried to bring some of that back when I returned.
So what would be aside from North Point, what would be the range of attendance that you would have seen there
But
at different churches?
numeric attendance?
Yes.
Oh yeah, like all over the place. Depended on the congregation. We visited Fellowship Baptist churches. We visited small rural churches. We went back and visited the very first church that we'd ever been part of, back just outside of St. Thomas, Ontario, and and each one was just unique and different in its own way. And because we knew they would be different, we wanted to have one consistent thing that we were comparing them against. Um, I can't compare North Point's resources to Queensway's resources, but how was North Point integrating people as versus how was Queensway, the church I was serving then? How are we doing it? So the size really was kind of all over the place, from monster right down to a very small intimate group where you were very conspicuous as a visitor.
Mm-hmm. And for denominations, would they have been mostly Baptist, broadly evangelical, or did you go to mainline as well?
Yeah, no, they would be, for us, they would have been broadly evangelical churches that we visited. We were making the most of an opportunity that, again, you can appreciate this, you just don't get. Um, it's a little different now in these last 3 or 4 months, because now that, almost everyone has gone online and they're housed after the fact, you can click around and see just about, anybody you want to see. And that wasn't necessarily the case before March of this year, and certainly wasn't the case for me in the fall of 2018.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I totally hear you, and it is a great opportunity. Of course, uh, integration is going to look a lot different right in this chapter right now. It's going to be all kinds of challenges, but that could take us in a whole nother direction. So I want to ask your experience. You are coming in from the parking lot. You're sitting down in the chair or the pew. What are you noticing just in that moment before you look at anything else? What kind of experiences did you have between getting to the parking lot and getting to your chair?
So we were consciously looking for um, direction. Once I walk in the door, do I know? Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I go? Like, how do I know what to do? Or is there a person there, who is saying, yeah, just head on up the stairs and go to your left, and that's where the sanctuary? Whatever. We were looking for direct. Were we being given direction, or were we left to fend for ourselves and thrash around feeling dumb in a building we'd never visited before?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we were first looking for. And I don't want it to sound like it was a test, and that wasn't our attitude. I mean, this was worship, right? Like, we were there for worship primarily. And since we were there, we were noticing these other things intentionally.
Mm-hmm. And did you have experiences where you were feeling lost, that you didn't know what was expected of you, where you're supposed to go, or any of those other things?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely did. And then we had just the opposite, where it was felt so warm, and it felt so uh, inclusive and embracing. There was some interesting dynamics with the different integration funnels, though, that or pipelines that the different churches were using. And sometimes we found that the church that had they were the best on the door, they were the best in the foyer, they were the best, to help you find a good place to sit. That was what they were good at, and that was all they were good at. And then there were others where you didn't get any of that. The church with the warmest, greatest, most holy atmosphere that we worshiped in all of those 13 weeks, I think we scarcely got said hello to at the door on the way in.
Wow.
So just because you've got this pipeline doesn't mean you've got a healthy community that you're integrating people into. And that was kind of the big thing that we discovered. The community that we would, if we had to choose any one of those 14 congregations, and and said, yeah, I think that would be the church we would attend. It was the one where we were the least welcomed, um, uh, in a practical sense, in a formal sense.
Right.
But once you were there, you just felt it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a broad spectrum of approaches.
What percentage of those churches do you think had a welcome center or something like that when you came in?
Um, that's a good. Some absolutely did, and these were the ones the largely those were larger, where you were as a guest. Of course, this is how you get the data. Go to the welcome center with your "I'm a visitor" card and pick up your free gift. So by the time my sabbatical was over, I had a wide variety of church mugs that we had been gifted at the various welcome centers. Some didn't have anything like that. Some didn't have guest cards, in the racks at all, or you had to ask for one. We filled out one at a church that you would know, and your viewers and listeners would know very well. We never heard from them. It happened to be a special Sunday that day, and there was one part of it that we thought that's really interesting, and we wanted to feed back to the church leadership about what we had seen and experienced. Never heard back.
Wow.
So it feels like you get to a certain size and you don't really have to be intentional anymore, apparently, in that congregation's view anyway, because they certainly weren't intentional, and we were making it as easy as we possibly could for them. I had to interrupt the guy at the door to actually get a card to fill. I stood there, I don't know, a minute and a half, while he was talking to another volunteer as I stood there.
Wow.
And then finally oh yeah, how are you? Yeah, good. I was just wondering if I could get one of those cards. Sure. Hands me a card. I filled out, put it in the box. Crickets. So yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Now, I've really been intrigued about the whole idea of getting the information from visitors. That's something that's very often pushed. We don't really do that here, not because we don't believe it's important, but just haven't found the way to do it that we feel comfortable with. Did it ever feel uncomfortable for you to hand over your phone number or email or whatever, or were you already open to that, being a pastor and being interested in this anyways?
Yeah, I mean, I knew how it worked. I knew that why they were doing that, and I also knew that for the most part we were in communities that we were far from home, like as I say, in 3 different provinces and 1 US state. We weren't going to be back, more than likely. So if and I can hit unsubscribe like anybody can if I feel like I'm just getting too much or a lot of irrelevant information. So I knew why those things were being asked, but yeah, you've got to be really careful about that. And I think it's awful hard. That's the catch-22. When we got back to the church, where we were said, we want to do this after the first visit, and we want to do this after the second visit, and by the third visit, we want to be able to call people by name and be able to ensure that they're getting. But if you don't get the information on the first visit, then you can't do any of that stuff. And if that was your only visit, then you didn't get a chance to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a challenge, and part of the design of our integration plan that I was working on. How do you move to the next step of your integration plan if you don't gather the necessary information at the front end? And frankly, I get that. Hey, I just showed up and I'm just looking around, and maybe this is a church I'll come to. Maybe I'll never be back. And now you want my personal information? I don't think so. So I get it on both sides.
I heard from one church, they have an interesting way of doing this. Instead of giving a gift to people in exchange for their contact information, they will actually donate to their local food bank a certain amount of money for every one of these cards that comes in. And so
Oh,
the person might think, well, I don't really need another mug, so I'm not going to give my email address. But when they think, oh yeah, I'd actually like to see the food bank get a little bit more money, and so people have been willing to do that. So that is one of the options that we've thought about in terms of doing that. We give gift baskets to everyone who comes and has our information, but not in exchange for their information. We leave it up to them, but it's something that we have definitely been thinking about. One question I had for you, because this is something that's happened to me many times when I visited churches on a Sunday off. I go there and people are really friendly and they come and say, hi, how are you doing? So what brings you here? And I'll say, well, I'm on vacation. I'm a pastor from, this many kilometers away. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they walk away. You're not worth talking to because you're not a potential.
There is no return on investment for this conversation.
Exactly. Did you experience that at all?
Yeah, I did. And I probably contributed to it. I think my wife would say I probably contributed to it because I wasn't identifying myself that way. Hi, welcome to our church. What brings you here this morning? Well, I'm on a break from my job. And so we've been visiting different churches, which is all true. But I wasn't self-disclosing. Annette, on the other hand, would do it every time. And then even after I just said I'm on a break from my job and we're just checking, visiting other churches, then she would just go, yeah, so my husband's a pastor. And so we were just, and so she would end up getting sometimes the response that you just described. But some of the best ones were those churches, those welcome team members, those ushers or greeters or whatever they're called, didn't faze them a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because they understood, as I reflected on it after, I think those people understood what their job was, and their job isn't membership recruitment. They're a welcome team. They're there to make people feel welcome in the Lord's house. And so whether you're a visiting pastor or whether you're not, there doesn't change the way they did their ministry. And I really respected that.
That's good. And it really does make a difference. I know I try to give full attention to people when I'm talking with them after a service and they say, well, I'm a visitor from Toronto. I live in Toronto and I just happen to be here for the weekend. I would never just walk away from that because you have no idea who they're going to talk to. And, the word gets around when those kind of attitudes are there. If a church is legitimately welcoming, then people will hear about that. And if you are not, people are going to hear about that as well. Now, some people have done some work on the difference between welcoming and friendly. Did that come up at all in your thoughts? So like a friendly church could be maybe a church where you walk in and you see that people are hugging each other and they're really happy to see each other, but perhaps are not as open to new people entering that, or maybe they'll want people to be there for a month or two before they're invited into the community, as opposed to a welcoming church that your first Sunday there, you're fully embraced. Did you notice anything like that?
I can't say that I did. And maybe that was just because I was specifically looking at a specific means of being welcomed or being integrated or being met. And so I was specifically looking for a certain action or a certain activity. And so I can't say that I did, but I understand completely what you're describing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, please tell me that this is something that is no longer the case, but I am really hoping that at no church you went to, did the pastor say in the services, are there any visitors here? Would you please stand and identify yourself? Please tell me that did not happen.
That halfway happened. The pastor did acknowledge that there are probably visitors here with us. Now, admittedly, it was a larger body. And if this is your first time here, would you just, throw up your hand and let us know that you're here? And the reason was because the welcome team had these little kits that they wanted to be sure got in the hands of the people who had no point of reference for how the congregation worked. So the clearest way to get to those folks was for those folks to self-disclose. But we didn't have to stand up, and we didn't have to, anything like that, although I've heard those horror stories too.
I've had that happen to me.
Really?
Yes. And for this introvert, it was not fun.
Those greeting times, they're a killer for this introvert here too. To be a visitor and then it comes up on the screen and says, talk to your neighbor about your favorite childhood television show. What? No, I don't want to do that.
Does that really happen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's meant to stimulate, social activity and social conversation. I understand the psychology of it, but as an introvert, no, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, not at all. No, thank you.
Yes.
It is a lot.
I know we have some differing opinions of the greeting time. That I see a benefit in it when it works right, because I have been in the situation where there's been a greeting time and you watch everyone else greet each other, and even when there's someone physically close enough to you that they don't shake your hand because they don't recognize who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, it made it worse by doing that. However, the stand and shake hands, I think we can say that that's probably done for a while now, thanks to COVID. So
yeah, I think we only. I'm trying to think. I think we only encountered that once or twice, and the one place was kind of a traditional, almost mainline evangelical congregation that it seemed to be a bit of a hangover from a former day. But for the most part, we didn't have that.
I have to tell you my horror story, and that is in the church that I grew up in. I think I was maybe 12 years old, and it was an Anglican church, and they called it the passing the peace. And you would actually get up out of your pew and walk around and shake hands. And so I was doing that, and I went over to my my best friend's mother and shook her hand, and she pulled me in and kissed me on the lips.
Yeah. Wow, was it a holy kiss? Oh boy,
lipstick. That's all I know, and that scarred me.
Man, I'm hoping that's not in the welcome team manual. Wow.
Yes. So the thing that I'm really interested in, based on your experience attending these churches, what kind of principles did you pull out, both in terms of what not to do and what to do in terms of integrating people?
That's a great question. We saw what I term as just missed opportunity after missed opportunity, whether it was an opportunity to be relational, like as in the greeting or the welcome, like we've just talked about, or whether it was an opportunity to tell me who Jesus is and why I should care. We just saw opportunity after opportunity lost. You don't know who I am. You don't know whether I just wandered in after a 10-day bender and I need something to change my life. And here's your opportunity to help me see. But you didn't tell me Jesus. You told me about this fun program. You told me about this. Pastor comes out in a Spider-Man suit in one church. Like, you showed me all kinds of fun stuff, but you missed the opportunity to help me meet Jesus. We were at one church, and they don't even call their worship services. They're called experiences, which was just super offensive to me to begin with. Because maybe it's semantics, I don't know, but an experience is what I get. Worship is what I give. Mm-hmm. And so come to the weekend experience means I'm coming prepared to get something. And that was certainly the paradigm that the church worked from. It was in October, and so they were doing like this harvest fall kind of family themed thing where like everybody's dressed in lumberjack shirts and there was a log sawing contest broke out in the middle of the church service experience on the platform. And There was team A, there was team B. And I still don't know what the point was, except that it was really cool and they did a log sawing. Axe throwing. The pastor did axe throwing on the platform while we were there. And I thought, okay, this is easy. This is easy. If you know your Greek at all, this is we're going to talk about sin here and missing the mark and all of this. And nope. No, we're just throwing the axe because it was cool. Now let's get that off the stage. And here's a video. And it really was the slushy machine in the foyer. True story. So it was all about experience. And the opportunity was missed. Intentionally, I don't know, but it was missed to help me understand who Jesus is. So I came back with that intentionality in mind, that let's not miss the one opportunity we might have to help someone meet the Lord for the first time or again.
Wow. I hope that preacher at least preached from the book of Acts.
Oh, nice. Nice. Axe throwing.
I couldn't stop myself there. Yeah. So missed opportunities. So what did you see that worked well though? What was, share a time where you attended one of these churches and you saw they get it. They understand what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. So now in this case, I don't mind telling you that it was Deepwater Church in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They get it. And authenticity is kind of an overused word, but it was for real. They were in a hand-me-down building. I think it was like an old Free Methodist building that they got handed down to them. The chairs, they were loose seating chairs, but like none of them matched. And so it was this kind of ramshackle appearance, but it was so real. They didn't put on a show. They weren't giving me an experience. They were just people coming together to lift the name of Jesus. So you had those kind of two extremes. You had a really great show over here that didn't tell me about Jesus. And over here you had no show at all, but I heard about Jesus. So I'm going to take the second one every single time. So it's not about, I believe we should be offering the Lord our best in worship, and the preaching should be the best that it should be. And whether if we have musical offerings, it should be the best that it can be, but not perfection, just the best that we can do. The best that we can offer with sincerity and with authenticity. And if that's what we're doing, then I believe the Lord accepts that. But if it's programmed down to the second, with the smoke machines and the laser lights and all of that stuff going, it's a great show. I'm not sure that's what the Lord's looking for from us. So that authenticity piece, that holiness, was something else that I brought back and attempted to integrate into my leadership. So both the holiness and the intentionality were two things that were just over and over again. That's it. Doesn't matter how big the congregation is. Doesn't matter what resources you have or don't have. Doesn't matter what kind of music you sing. It doesn't matter whether you prefer the pastor have a tie or not have a tie or whatever. It was about the authenticity behind it. Was the gospel there? Did you take the opportunity to tell me about Jesus? Because this was the one opportunity you had. Did you take it? Which is not to say, like, I'm not talking about like bar the door, right? And nobody gets out until they're saved. That's not what I'm talking about. But we're there to worship who? Well, then tell me about him. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
That absolutely does. Yes.
Yeah.
And I have lots of thoughts there that I could go off on. I know that I felt strongly for quite a while that excellence can be an idol in churches. And I do believe in excellence. I think it is important to be as excellent as you can. But for some, that's what they're worshiping, their own excellence in what they're doing. And I completely agree with what you said, that worship is not to be a show or a performance. I don't know how many times I've had people say, oh, I went to this church and I really didn't get anything out of worship, and I didn't enjoy it. And the music was not something that got me excited. And then I search and search through the New Testament, trying to find anything like that there, and there's nothing.
Right.
There's no description of worship as that. It's a sacrifice. It's giving of our time, of our presence, um, and it's about what we're giving to God, and it's not about excellence. I know. Um, the example I thought of is I was at a family weekend for Christian Horizons, and there would be a worship time, and it was one guy with a guitar, and he's good, and then he would invite all these kids to come up on stage, with a lot of them with developmental disabilities, some with physical disabilities, and they had a big box of different instruments, tambourines, and all the stuff that is super loud, and they all got on stage and just worshiped together.
Hmm.
And I just felt the presence of God so powerfully in that moment. And then I think it was a couple weeks later, I went to another church, a very large church in our area, with the smoke machine, the lasers, the lights, professional band, that could put out a CD at any time, just absolutely excellent. And I just sat there, and yeah, that's a good performance. Didn't sing
Yeah.
along, and because no one was singing, everyone was there because they knew that if they sang along with the songs, well, you're kind of taken away from the band because the band is so good. And I thought, well, I'm having trouble worshiping here,
Yeah.
and it's not because they're not excellent. In fact, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some of the thoughts I've had as I listened to what you were saying.
And that same authenticity, it's stuck with me since this time. Um, since this COVID season began, and so many of our churches, had to pivot to an online presence that maybe they didn't have before, or hadn't really invested in, or didn't really see value in before. Um, and and I've just been so appreciative of because it's not a contest. There are some presentations on a Sunday morning, a live stream, that is so professionally cut together, professionally edited, and it just looks really good. And I'm not judging whether God was in that or not in that, but I've also seen just the most sincere preaching. And the video looks like a Bin Laden cave video, like the lighting is horrible and the pastor's head is way too big but you know what? It was real. And this is what my encouragement would be to the pastors, just continue to do what God's calling you to do, the absolute best you know how to do it. It's not a contest, never has been. Don't compare to what that church down the road is doing. Just continue to serve with a realness, with an authenticity. You described that worship that you attended. That's real. Those kids weren't performing. Those kids were just doing what they felt. That's real. That's
Hmm.
how it should be.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And for myself, have a great interest in small churches. I've always been in small churches, and I know that there are a lot of times that pastors and congregations in small churches feel like they can't measure up because they can't necessarily have that amazing worship band. They might not have the perfect sound system or all the extra bells and whistles that some of the churches they look up to have,
Mhm.
but they can be authentic. And I actually remember a previous church I was at, and we had this family. They were the only young family that were there. Everyone else were seniors. Everyone else was retired, and they came and they visited a few weeks. So it was feeling good. And then they said, well, you know what? We're actually going to go to another church because they have more programs and they have things for our teenage son. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it was nice to meet you, and it was great to have you here. And about a month later, they showed up again, and they said that, well, we really like your church, and our son, he said, I want to go back to the place where all the people are really friendly and nice. And
Mhm.
And they were okay with us not having all the programs
Yep.
because there was an authenticity to that church, and they stayed there for as long as they were in that community. And that really taught me a lot, because on paper we could not compare to that other church
Right.
that they had gone to, but there was something else that was going on, another aspect of reality that we don't always take into account.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is there anything else you want to share before we close things off? Are there any other words of wisdom for pastors or congregations in terms of integrating people?
You know, God is creative. That's what I want to say. God is creative. Um, I think sometimes we have him locked into a certain, God only shows up once I do the invocation prayer. And then once I do the benediction, God departs. And that's the window of time that God is present. And other than, God shows up in the children's time. You know, God shows up with the musical instruments you just described. God is there. He's already there. And the way that we can honor and worship him, God's creative. You know, God 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 created everything and then said, well, that'll do. No, he said it's good, right? And so that creativity needs to be reflected in what we offer him, we who are made in his image. Let's be creative. I don't mean randomly creative, and I don't mean show off performance creative, like just doing something for the sake of doing something and saying, wow, wasn't that creative? But
Like
doing
throwing axes?
like throwing axes. Exactly. What was the point of that? You could say that was creative, but it had no point. Creativity with a point, creativity that helps me see, hear, experience God. Be creative. Get outside the 3 songs, prayer, scripture, passing the peace, dismissal of the kids, now the sermon, now the hymn of reflection, now the benediction. See ya. Let's get beyond that. And I don't mean randomly, where it's because he's not the God of chaos, he's a God of order. But I hope that's the one thing I hope that sticks after this COVID season is over and gatherings in person are fully back again. I hope the creativity that we're seeing in churches, yours and so many others, I hope that continues. I hope it sticks, because I think it reflects God really well.
I just want to completely echo that, because we are in a moment of time that is a gift. A lot of churches struggle with change. I joke that we don't mind change as long as it's the same kind of change we've always had. But now we are forced change. Like, I've watched my congregation, which I wouldn't say is overly open to change. They're not completely hostile, but they're not excited about change. But they've had to make changes during COVID. Yep. And when we haven't opened up our church building yet, but we will be soon. And when we do, that's going to look different. And right now, I have the opportunity to lead them in fresh expressions of worship and everything else in a way that is not going to be the shock of introducing something new after, 186 years of doing it this one way. Mm-hmm. It's really is an opportunity. I mean, I'm not thankful for COVID, but it is something. It's an opportunity that church leaders need to take advantage of and to use to the best of their ability.
I was laughing with one of our colleagues back in, I think it was April or late April, and his church had not had an online presence really in terms of a live stream or video accessibility really at all. Prior to being forced to because of COVID-19. And his leadership were now, like, we don't know when this is going to be over, but whenever it's over, we're going to keep doing this, because we've seen the instrument, the tool that it is. We've seen how useful it can be. And so, yeah, when we come back together again, we're still going to be doing this, and hopefully we'll be doing it better and with better equipment and so on and so on and so on. And I laughed and I said, like, how many meetings do you think you would have had to have held unsuccessfully to try and convince those very same elders of the need to have a web presence, the way that they didn't have any choice but to accept? and now they love it. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, it would have been dozens, and I would have been unsuccessful.
Yeah.
So the fact that we didn't have a choice, I think, has been amazing, and I hope the creativity that's resulted in, I hope it stays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes, it's great. Well, thank you, Deane. I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with us about your experience, and I think there's a lot that we can pull from this, and we pray God's blessings on you and your family and your future as you look for the next opportunities and your studies as well. So you're doing your Doctor of Ministry degree at Tyndale
that's right, in the leadership track,
in the
and
leadership
I'm
track.
in the final leg of that. All things being equal, Lord willing, I hope to convocate in May of 2021 and be Dr. Proctor.
I've wanted that for a long time, and hopefully this is the year for me to graduate with my DMin as well. So
Excellent,
yeah,
excellent.
and actually a lot of the stuff that we've talked about really overlaps with what my research is on it, because I'm looking at how small churches are able to be welcoming and inclusive places for people with disabilities, and I I'm focusing on the fact that they don't have to have all the resources of those mega churches, that
Right.
the normal churches can do that. But that's a discussion for another day. Thank you so much for this, and I encourage people to check me out on my website, stephenjbedard.com. Thanks for watching, listening, whatever you've done, and God bless you all.